The glass doors of Ross's Italian restaurant explode inward at 3:22 in the morning, and the November wind tears through the foyer like a blade wrapped in ice. Serena Morgan stumbles through the opening, her body listing left, her blonde hair matted to her face with sweat and something darker. Blood. The scent hits first, copper mixing with garlic and red wine from the kitchen, thick and choking in the silence of the sleeping restaurant. Her winter coat hangs open, shredded at the seams, and beneath it her white blouse is no longer white. A gash runs across her ribs, jagged and deep, and it bleeds freely, soaking everything, dripping onto the black and white checkered marble floor in a pattern that spreads like a broken map. 3 stumbling steps forward. Her legs do not obey her commands. They buckle beneath her like the legs of a newborn animal, uncoordinated and failing. She tries to speak. Her mouth opens. Her throat produces only a sound like something breaking, like glass fracturing inside her chest. Please? I can't, it hurts. The words are barely a whisper, barely real. Rocco and Gino sit at a corner table, their black suits tailored to perfection, their shoulder holsters visible beneath unbuttoned jackets. They have been guarding this restaurant for 7 years and 3 months, and nothing has ever interrupted their midnight shift in this way. They freeze. Their hands stop moving. Their breath stops coming. The espresso cups hover halfway to their lips, suspended in disbelief. She takes one more step, then her knees simply give way. Her body collapses toward the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, and in that terrible final moment before impact, something extraordinary happens. Her hand shoots into her torn coat pocket and closes around paper and bills. Crumpled. Worthless. An eviction notice with 12 days stamped in red ink across the bottom. And $11. 11 crumpled bills that represent everything she has left in the world, and she holds them like they are treasures, like they are pieces of her daughter's heart still beating in her palm. She hits the ground 3 tables away from where Rocco and Gino sit frozen in their chairs. Her body convulses. Once. Twice. Her hand pressed to her ribcage, trying to hold herself together, trying to keep the bleeding from consuming her entirely. Her breath comes in gasps, each one a prayer answered by agony. In the candlelit private booth in the back of the restaurant, far from the entrance, a man lifts his dark eyes from a glass of bourbon. Lucian Rossi is 42 years old, and his face carries the weight of empires built on violence and silence. Dark hair, silvered at the temples. A scar runs from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale and precise, a reminder of a war that ended 15 years ago when his wife died in his arms. He wears an open white shirt beneath a tailored black suit that costs more than most people earn in 6 months. Gold watch on his left wrist. Silver rings on 3 of his fingers. He watches her collapse with the detachment of a man who has seen too much death to be moved by anything anymore. His lieutenant Marco sits across from him, and Marco sees his boss's eyes change. Just slightly. Just enough. Enough to know that something has broken in the careful architecture of Lucian's controlled world. Serena tries to push herself up. Her arms give way. She falls back down, her gasps becoming sobs, her body shaking with a cold that has nothing to do with the November wind still screaming through the open doors. Nobody moves. The kitchen staff has already fled to the back. The hostess locked herself in the office. Only Rocco and Gino remain, staring at this broken woman bleeding on their floor, and neither of them knows what to do because neither of them has ever seen their boss move toward someone in pain. They have never seen him move toward anything except power. But he does move now. Lucian stands with the deliberate grace of a general surveying a battlefield, each movement controlled, purposeful, final. He crosses the restaurant floor without hurrying. His expensive Italian leather shoes click against the marble with each step. Click! 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 The sound echoes through the silence like a countdown to something neither of them can name. He kneels beside her. He does not ask who she is. He does not ask how she got here or what made her come to his restaurant specifically. He simply kneels and looks at her face, and in his dark eye something moves. Something cracks. Something that may have been locked away for so long that even he forgot it existed. "My name is Lucian," he says, and his voice comes like thunder, deep and solid like an oath. "You are safe now." Serena looks at him through the fog of her pain, and for just a moment, she stops shaking. For just a moment, the world stops spinning. She sees a powerful man kneeling beside her like a supplicant, like a man soothing a lost child, and she has no idea, she cannot possibly know, that this man controls every street corner in Philadelphia, that he has built an empire on the bodies of men who crossed him, that he has not shown mercy to anyone in 15 years. She does not know that in exactly 60 seconds, everything will change. She will press her trembling hands to his chest and save his life as his heart gives way beneath the shock of seeing her, beneath the weight of a memory she has not triggered and cannot understand. She will become bound to him in ways neither of them can escape. But first, there is this moment. There is only this moment. "Rocco," Lucian says without turning his head. "Call Dr. Salazar. Tell him I am bringing someone in 5 minutes. Tell him to have operating room 3 ready." Rocco nods once and pulls out his phone. His hands tremble slightly. In 15 years of working for Lucian Rossi, he has never heard him use that tone of voice, that particular frequency of command mixed with something that might be concern, might be fear, might be the sound of a dam breaking. Lucian looks back at Serena. "What is your name?" "Serena," she whispers. "Serena Morgan." "Serena." He says her name like it is a prayer. "You are going to be fine. I am going to take you somewhere safe, and I am going to make sure that whoever did this to you pays for every drop of blood." She shakes her head slowly. "My daughter. Lily. She's 7. She has a heart condition and she needs surgery in 21 days and the cost is $65,000 and I have nothing, I can't help her, I can't." Her voice breaks into sobs, into sounds that are no longer words, into the pure raw sound of a mother breaking apart. Lucian does not respond. He simply removes his suit jacket with one smooth motion and wraps it around her shoulders, covering the wound partially, and the scent of his cologne, something expensive, something dark, he mixes with the copper scent of her blood. In that moment, standing in the blizzard, watching through the open doors as their boss carries a bleeding woman toward a black SUV with tinted windows, Rocco and Gino exchange a look neither of them had ever exchanged before in 15 years of standing at his side. A look that said, something has changed tonight. Something has broken, and it can never be fixed. The man they work for just became capable of something they thought was dead in him. Love. Or something that looks exactly like love to men who have never seen it before. The black SUV pulls away from the curb, its engine a deep rumble in the silence. The blizzard swallows the red taillights whole. And in the back seat, Serena Morgan holds her $11 in one hand and presses the other against her ribs, and she does not yet know that her life just inverted. She does not yet know that the most dangerous man in Philadelphia just decided that her pain was worth more to him than his own kingdom. She only knows that for the first time in weeks, in months, in years, someone touched her and did not hurt her. Someone looked at her and did not see a transaction. Someone called her by her name like it mattered. But what she did not understand was that Lucian Rossi had just triggered something in himself that he spent 15 years trying to bury. And before this night ended, secrets would unravel, mysteries would surface, and 2 villains moving silently through the darkness would realize that the woman they thought they had destroyed was now standing in the shadow of the most powerful man alive. Now let us go back to the beginning. Let us understand how Serena Morgan ended up bleeding on a Mafia boss's floor at 3:22 in the morning. Let us trace the path of every desperate choice that led her to that moment of collapse, so we can understand what comes next. 7 hours earlier, at 8 o'clock in the evening, Serena Morgan stood in the kitchen of the Brennan family home in northeast Philadelphia, her hand submerged in dishwater so hot it turned her skin red and raw. Steam rose around her face like smoke from a fire that refused to cool. The kitchen smelled like roast chicken and garlic and something else, something acrid and threatening that had nothing to do with the food. Harold Brennan sat at the dining table behind her, his voice a constant low growl punctuated by the clink of ice in a glass of whiskey. He was 61 years old, his face bloated from decades of drinking, his grey eyes small and vicious like a cornered animal's. He wore a suit that might have been expensive 20 years ago, but time and neglect had rendered it shabby. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who solved problems with violence and collected grudges like insurance policies. "Your mother's accounts are frozen," he said, and in his voice was the particular satisfaction of a man delivering devastating news to someone powerless to resist it. "The lawyer called me today. Apparently, there is paperwork that needs your signature before the inheritance can be transferred. She left $370,000, and you are going to sign it over to me, and you are going to do it tomorrow morning, or I am throwing you and that bastard daughter of yours out on the street by nightfall." Serena's hands continued moving through the dishwater even though her entire body had gone numb. She had been orphaned for 4 months. Her mother had died of cancer in a hospice facility in West Philly, and Serena had sat beside her bed for 72 hours straight, holding her hand while the morphine drip slowly emptied a life of 73 years into silence. Her mother had left a will. A very specific will. Money for Lily's medical care. Money for Serena's future. Money that Harold Brennan had always resented, had always viewed as his by virtue of having married Serena's mother 23 years earlier. Money that Serena had already discovered, in her mother's private papers hidden in the back of her closet, he had been systematically stealing for the past 8 years. "I can't," Serena said, and her voice came out as barely more than a breath. "The money is for Lily. The surgery cost $65,000. If I sign it over to you, she will die. Her heart is failing and she needs intervention, and there is no other source, no other way, and I can't let her die." The sound that came next was the sound of a chair scraping backward across hardwood. The sound of Harold standing up. The sound that Serena had come to recognize as a warning, a countdown, the prelude to pain. He moved toward her with the slouching gait of a drunk man who was nonetheless still dangerous. She could smell the whiskey on him, sharp and chemical, cutting through her own fear like a blade. She braced herself. What happened next happened very fast. His hand closed around her arm with the force of a vice. He spun her around, her hand still wet and dripping, and he drove her backward toward the kitchen counter with such force that when her ribs connected with the edge, the air exploded out of her lungs. That was when she felt it. The sharp hot burst of pain as something tore, something broke, something inside her gave way. Her back scraped against the edge of the counter, but it was her ribs that sang with agony, her ribs that told her something was deeply, critically wrong. He released her. She fell to her knees, her wet hands pressing against her side, and when she pulled them away, they were wet with something darker than dishwater. "You have until tomorrow," Harold said, and he stepped over her prone body without looking at her, without acknowledging that he had just broken her open. "Sign the papers, or both of you can find somewhere else to sleep tomorrow night." She heard him leave the kitchen. She heard the television turn on in the living room. She heard the sound of her daughter crying in the upstairs bedroom, scared by the noise, terrified by her mother's fall. The crying went on for a long time before gradually fading into silence. Serena pulled herself to her feet using the counter. She looked at herself in the window above the sink and saw a woman who was barely recognizable. Blonde hair going gray at the roots. Eyes hollowed out by years of working double shifts and eating the leftovers from restaurants where she was invisible. A body that had broken somewhere between being 30 and being 4 years old in the eyes of the world. She pulled off her blouse in the dark kitchen and examined the wound beneath. A gash. Long and deep, still bleeding steadily. She wrapped herself in an old hand towel and climbed the stairs to her daughter's room. Lily was 7 years old but looked older due to the constant exhaustion of a body struggling to function with a failing heart. She sat up in bed when her mother entered, her small face crumpled with worry. "Mommy, did Daddy hurt you again?" Lily asked, and the casual way she said it, the normalcy in her voice, cut deeper than any blade. Serena sat on the edge of her daughter's bed and pulled her close, and she made a decision in that moment. A decision that would change everything. She was not going to stay. She was not going to sign the papers. She was not going to let Harold Brennan destroy what remained of her life or her daughter's future. She was going to run. By midnight, she had packed a small bag with Lily's medications and 3 changes of clothes. She had withdrawn the last of her savings from the bank account Harold did not know about, $387. She had called the bank and frozen her mother's inheritance accounts, which she could do because her mother's will made her an executor, and that had bought her time. Not much. Just enough. At 1 in the morning, she wrapped her daughter in a winter coat and carried her to the bus stop 3 blocks away, moving through the darkness like a ghost, like a woman who had already disappeared. But she had nowhere to go. No family. No friends who had not abandoned her years ago when she became a single mother to a sick child. No resources except the money in her pocket and the determination that was burning in her chest like a fire refusing to be extinguished. She rode the bus for 2 hours, getting off at random stops, changing routes, trying to lose herself in the sleeping city. She found a 24-hour diner at 2 in the morning and sat in a booth with her daughter, ordering hot chocolate she could not afford and watching the clock move toward dawn. It was the waitress at that diner, a woman named Rosa who had worked there for 12 years, who told her about Ross's Italian restaurant. Rosa had cleaned houses for Lucian Ross's staff once, years ago, and she knew that he employed people, that he sometimes helped people who came to him with nowhere else to go. He is not a good man, Rosa had said, and her voice was low and careful, the voice of someone choosing words that might change someone's life. But he is a man who understands loyalty. If you go to him, you will owe him something. And debts like that never disappear. But if you need help and there is nowhere else to turn, he will give it to you. That much I know. Serena had taken the address. She had ridden through the November night in a taxi she could not afford, watching the meter tick upward toward numbers that made her stomach clench. She had paid the driver with most of her remaining cash and gotten out 4 blocks away, walking through a blizzard toward a restaurant that glowed golden in the darkness like a beacon. She had walked in at 3:22 in the morning, her wound bleeding through her blouse, her daughter safely sleeping in a coat check near the back, and she had collapsed toward help with no idea that the man who caught her was the one person in Philadelphia capable of protecting her from the 2 monsters now moving through the darkness to reclaim her. But that is where our story truly begins. 18 hours earlier, the radiator in Serena Morgan's studio apartment clanked and wheezed like a dying animal, struggling against the November cold that had seeped through the walls since September. She lay in the narrow bed listening to that sound, listening to the silence underneath it, listening to the space where hope used to live. The alarm on her phone read 5:47 in the morning. She did not move yet. She lay there in the dark counting the days, a habit that had become as necessary as breathing. In the corner of the room, on a mattress that touched the foot of her own bed, her daughter Lily slept with her mouth slightly open, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was not quite right. Serena had learned to hear the difference between a normal child's breathing and Lily's breathing months ago. Normal children breathed quietly. Lily breathed like someone climbing stairs. Every breath was work. At 5:58, Serena rose. She moved quietly across the cold floor to the small dresser where she kept Lily's clothes folded in a stack so neat it looked like a prayer. She dressed her daughter in layers, peeling back the flannel pajama top to check the surgical scar that ran down her 7-year-old chest like a map of suffering. The scar was 3 inches long, pale pink, still tender at the edges. It was from the procedure 2 years ago when Lily's heart had first begun to fail, the operation that was supposed to buy them time. Time was running out. "Mama," Lily whispered, her eyes still closed. "Is it morning?" "Yes, baby. It is morning." Serena helped her daughter sit up, helped her pull on a sweater 2 sizes too large because the smaller ones had been outgrown and there was no money for new ones. Lily's blonde curls fell across her face, and Serena pushed them back, kissing her forehead. This was the ritual. This was the whole world. In the kitchenette, Serena filled a pot with water and set it on the electric burner, then opened the cabinet where she kept the instant oatmeal packets. She had 7 left. Lily needed to eat breakfast before school. Lily needed to eat lunch at school. Serena needed to survive on coffee and whatever she could steal from the break room at the houses she cleaned. While the water boiled, she opened her wallet. Inside was a crumpled $5 bill, 2 singles, and 75 cents in coins. $8.75. She had walked past a bodega yesterday and seen bread on sale, and milk, and eggs, and she had kept walking because $8.75 had to last 7 days. 7 days until she got paid for cleaning houses, and even then it would only be enough to cover the rent that was already 8 days late. She pulled out 3 quarters and 2 dimes. $2.75. That was Lily's lunch money. That left $6 for the week. She set the coins on the counter and stared at them like they were pieces of a puzzle that could never fit together. "Mama, is the water ready?" Lily's voice was smaller than it should have been, thin like the rest of her, like the world had been slowly erasing her since birth. "Yes, sweetheart. It is ready." The oatmeal took 2 minutes. Serena stirred in a tablespoon of brown sugar they had taken from a restaurant, and she tried not to think about the field trip permission slip that had come home in Lily's backpack yesterday. $15. An afternoon at the Children's Museum, a field trip that every other child in the 2nd grade would attend, a thing that Lily wanted with the kind of want that broke Serena's heart because Serena could not fix it. They ate at the small table. Lily managed half a bowl. She pushed the rest away, her breath coming slightly harder than it had before. Fatigue was coming earlier these days. The cardiologist had warned about this. "We should go soon," Serena said. "Your teacher does not like it when we are late." Serena dressed herself in the clothes she had worn 4 times that week, a grey sweater with a small hole near the hem and jeans that had been patched at the knee. She put on the coat that was not quite warm enough and helped Lily into her puffer jacket, the zippers half broken, the lining torn. They lived in a neighborhood where broken things stayed broken because fixing them cost money. Outside, the November wind moved through the streets like a blade wrapped in ice, and Serena held Lily's hand as they walked. 6 blocks to the elementary school. 6 blocks that took nearly 15 minutes because Lily could not walk faster because her heart was working too hard just to keep her moving. Other children raced past them on the sidewalk, their parents pushing strollers, their laughter bright against the grey morning. Serena did not look at them. At the school entrance, a teacher named Mrs. Chen stood watching the children arrive. When she saw Lily, her expression softened into something that looked like pity. Serena hated pity. Pity was a thing people gave you when they had already decided you were broken beyond repair. "Serena," Mrs. Chen said, touching her arm. "I wanted to talk to you about the field trip next week. It would be wonderful to have Lily join us. The children are learning about the ocean, and there is an exhibit about coral reefs." Serena's throat tightened. She forced her face into a smile. "We will see. Thank you for letting us know." What she meant was, "I have no money." What she meant was, "My daughter will stay home that day while everyone else learns about coral reefs and I will pretend it does not matter." Mrs. Chen squeezed her arm again, and Serena felt the weight of the squeeze like a stone in her chest. She walked Lily to her classroom, kissed the top of her head, and left before her daughter could ask again about the field trip. The walk to Victoria Ashford's mansion in Rittenhouse Square took 45 minutes. Serena's fingers went numb before she reached 19th Street. She carried a canvas bag in one hand that had a hole in the bottom corner, groceries she had purchased with exact change, canned beans, rice, a small package of chicken that was on sale. The bag felt heavier than it should have. Everything felt heavier than it used to. The mansion sat behind an iron gate, for stories of pale stone and dark windows. Victoria Ashford owned half a block. Her late husband had been a judge. She had inherited money from a family that had owned textile mills in the 1800s, the kind of wealth that was so old it did not even feel like money anymore. It felt like air. It felt like the natural state of things. Serena used her key to let herself in through the service entrance. The kitchen was larger than her entire apartment. Victoria's breakfast dishes sat on the marble counter, untouched toast and black coffee in a cup so thin you could see through it. Serena began to wash them, her hands moving through warm water, and she did not let herself think about the radiator at home or the surgical scans or the number 65,000 that the cardiologist had spoken with such careful certainty. At 10 o'clock, Victoria came into the kitchen. She was 56 years old, with silver hair cut short and precise, wearing a cashmere sweater the color of cream. The sweater cost more than Serena's monthly rent. Victoria had a way of moving through her own house like she was walking through a museum that existed for her pleasure alone. "The study needs the windows done," Victoria said. She did not look at Serena directly. Victoria rarely looked at her directly, as though direct eye contact might create a connection neither of them wanted. "And the library? The chandelier is collecting dust again." "Yes, Miss Ashford." Victoria paused at the doorway. "I heard that Eleanor's health is declining." "A shame. She was always such a capable woman, despite her tendency toward chaos." "I suppose the apple does not fall far." The words landed like stones. Eleanor was Serena's mother. Eleanor had been Victoria's friend, or had been once, before Eleanor made the mistake of marrying Harold Brennan and signing papers she did not read, papers that gave him control of everything. Victoria had watched that happen. Victoria had probably known exactly what it meant. "My mother is fine," Serena said, and her voice did not shake, and she did not look up from the sink. After Victoria left, Serena stood in the kitchen for a long moment, her hand still in the water, the smell of lemon soap around her like a wall. She thought about her mother in the house with Harold Brennan, a man who counted money the way other people counted heartbeats, whose hands were large and whose temper had no warning sign. She thought about the fact that her mother had already given him everything and it was not enough. At 2 o'clock, Serena left the mansion and walked to the cardiologist's office on Walnut Street. Dr. Martinez was expecting her. He had examined Lily 2 weeks ago, and the results had come back, and now he wanted to talk to Serena about next steps. That was how doctors spoke about the end of the world. They called it next steps. The waiting room was full of mothers and children, and Serena sat with her hands folded, watching the clock move toward the appointment time. When the nurse called her back, she stood and walked toward her daughter's future or the end of it, she was not sure which. Dr. Martinez was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who had spent his life delivering bad news in the gentlest way possible. He had Lily scans on a light board. He had measurements and numbers written on a chart. "The valve is worsening faster than we anticipated," he said, and he spoke slowly, carefully, the way you would speak to someone who was standing at the edge of a cliff. "Without the surgery, I estimate she has between 4 and 6 months before her heart will begin to fail catastrophically. The surgery window is right now. We need to schedule the operation within the next 21 days. After that, the risk increases exponentially." Serena heard the words. She understood them. She held a piece of paper that said Lily Morgan needed open-heart surgery, cardiac valve replacement, and the cost was $65,000. "What if we cannot afford it?" she asked, and her voice sounded like someone else's voice, like someone speaking from underwater. Dr. Martinez's expression did not change. Kindness, pity, the helplessness of a man who could save a child's life but could not save her from the fact of poverty. "There are payment plans. There are programs. I will give you the names of everyone who might be able to help." He handed her a sheet of paper with phone numbers and websites and names of organizations. Serena took it. She folded it and put it in her pocket. When she left the office, she found a bench and sat down. She opened her wallet. $11. $11 and a piece of paper that said her daughter had 21 days. At 6 o'clock, she picked Lily up from after-school care, paid the woman who watched her with $2 bills, and carried her daughter back toward home. But Lily was asking for her grandmother. Lily had not seen Eleanor in 6 weeks because Harold Brennan had decided it was not convenient. Eleanor lived in a house she no longer owned, in a marriage that was the kind of trap that tightens the more you move. Serena changed direction. She walked toward the neighborhood where her mother and stepfather lived, a neighborhood of brick row houses and narrow streets, a place where the November darkness came early and complete. She climbed the steps to the front door and knocked. Harold opened it. He was a large man with a drinker's face, red and bloated, with eyes that had long ago decided the world owed him something. He was wearing a polo shirt and a watch that cost more than Serena's life. I want to see my mother, Serena said. Eleanor is resting. I do not care. I want to see her. And I want you to listen to something. Serena's hands were shaking. She steadied them. My mother left you in control of her inheritance, and you have spent it. All of it. I have a daughter who needs surgery in 21 days. $65,000. I do not have that money, and neither do you, but you have what my mother left you, and I am asking you to give it to her. To us. To save her life. Harold's face changed. Something small and cruel moved across his features like a shadow. He stepped forward, and the door frame seemed to shrink. Your mother left everything to me, he said, and his voice was quiet, which was worse than shouting. Every penny. I earned it. I have already spent it on investments. You get nothing. She gets nothing. That is the end of this conversation. Please, Serena said. Just listen. Harold grabbed her arm, his fingers like a vice closing around bone. He pulled her toward him and then toward the kitchen. She stumbled, trying to stay on her feet, and the edge of the counter caught her at the ribs. Pain bloomed, sharp and immediate. She heard something tear, her blouse, or her skin, or something inside her that was holding her together. Blood began to drip, warm and dark, down her side. Get out, Harold said. And do not come back here. Serena staggered out into the November night. The wound in her ribs burned with every breath. She walked without direction, letting her feet carry her away from that house, away from the man who owned everything and was willing to let a child die rather than release what he had already stolen. The streets of Philadelphia spread out around her like a maze, and she was lost inside it, bleeding, broken, running out of time. It was the cold that finally drove her toward somewhere. It was the realization that she had no home to return to, no one to call, no money even for a taxi. She walked through the blizzard, her wound seeping blood into her coat, her breath coming in gasps, until she saw the golden glow of Ross's Italian restaurant ahead, warm light spilling from windows onto the frozen street. She had passed this place 1,000 times. Rosa had mentioned it once, speaking in low, careful tones about a man who understood loyalty, a man who sometimes helped people. She did not know who he was. She did not know that the man inside was the most powerful figure in Philadelphia's underworld, or that her presence would change everything, or that the choice she was about to make would tear apart the lives of everyone who had tried to hurt her. She simply walked through the glass doors at 3:22 in the morning, and she collapsed. The marble floor of Ross's Italian restaurant gleamed under soft golden light, a floor that had witnessed countless deals, countless secrets, countless nights where power moved like water through invisible channels. At 3:22 in the morning, that floor was empty except for one private booth in the back where Lucian Rossi sat alone with a glass of whiskey he had not touched, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the chest of a man who had survived more than most men should have to survive. His face carried the architecture of his 62 years, sharp cheekbones, a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw like a blade drawn by fate, eyes the color of storm clouds that had seen too much. On his wrist, a gold watch worth more than a year of a waitress's salary ticked away the hours of a night that refused to end. Rocco and Gino stood near the kitchen entrance, two men in charcoal suits, their bodies positioned at angles that allowed them to see every door, every window, every possible threat. They had worked for Lucian Rossi for 15 and 18 years respectively, and they had learned to read the small movements of his face the way other men read newspapers. Tonight, something was wrong. His jaw was clenched. His fingers drummed once against the table, then stopped. He was thinking about Elena again. They could always tell. The glass doors burst open with a sound like breaking bones. Wind and snow poured into the warm restaurant, and behind them came a woman who looked like she was being held together by nothing but spite and the last threads of consciousness. Serena Morgan was 28 years old but appeared decades older, her dark hair matted with sweat and melting snow, her face the color of old paper. Her winter coat hung open, revealing a white blouse that was no longer white but crimson from the ribcage down. Blood had soaked through to her skin, dark and wet, and every breath she took made her wince as though her own body was betraying her. Her eyes were the only thing that burned with life, green eyes, wide and desperate, scanning the restaurant for something, anything, a reason to keep standing. She took 3 steps forward. Her legs gave out like a puppet with its strings cut, and she collapsed near Rocco and Gino's position, her body hitting the floor with a sound that made both men move forward in automatic response, their hands instinctively reaching for the weapons they carried like extensions of their own breathing. Lucian raised one finger. Just one finger, held up in the air with the kind of authority that stopped violence the way a wall stops wind. Rocco's hand froze. Gino withdrew half a step. Lucian rose from his booth with movements that were slow and controlled, each motion deliberate, the way a general surveys a battlefield, and he walked across the marble floor that suddenly seemed to stretch on forever, past the tables set with white cloth and crystal glasses, past the paintings of the Amalfi Coast hanging on burgundy walls, until he knelt beside the bleeding woman on the floor. His expensive suit, tailored in Milan, worth more than everything Serena Morgan owned, began to absorb her blood. "Who did this to you?" he said, and his voice was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. Not a question. A demand that the universe answer him. Serena's vision blurred. The edges of the world dissolved into watercolor, but his face above her came into focus with terrible clarity. She saw the scar, the gray eyes, the weight of something ancient and heavy pressed into the space between his eyebrows. She opened her mouth to speak. Then his face went white. Not pale. White. As though all the blood had been drawn from him in an instant, as though the color of life itself was being drained away. His hand flew to his chest, pressing hard against his ribs. He gasped once, a sound of surprise and pain mixed together, and then again, shorter this time, more desperate. His eyes rolled back and his body went rigid. Lucian Rossi collapsed beside her. Rocco screamed his name. Gino was already running, his voice shouting for the paramedics, for the ambulance, for God and anyone else who might be listening. But Serena did not scream. Serena did not move. She lay there for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, and then something inside her, something that had learned long ago that the world takes everything from you if you let it, that the only power you have is the power to refuse to let go, erupted from her chest. She forced herself onto her knees. The movement sent lightning through her ribs, fire blooming in her chest where Harold had thrown her against the counter, and she bit down on her tongue so hard she tasted blood. She reached out with both hands and found Lucian's chest, felt the muscle and bone beneath the fabric of his shirt, and she pressed down with all the strength she had left. 1. Her hands rose and fell, the compressions brutal and necessary, her voice shaking as she counted aloud into the terrible silence. 2. 3. Her ribs screamed with every movement, every compression sending white-hot pain through her body, but she did not stop. She could not stop. She had spent 8 months watching her daughter's face at night, watching Lily sleep in the darkness, listening to the small child's breathing grow more labored each week as her damaged heart worked harder to keep her alive. She had spent 2 years watching her mother's coffin lowered into the ground while Harold Brennan stood beside her in an expensive suit, his hand on her shoulder, his smile a lie. She had spent a lifetime being told she was nothing, nobody, the kind of person that the world was better off ignoring. But this man was alive. This man was breathing. This man would not become another ghost in her collection of the dead. 4. 5. 6. Rocco and Gino watched in frozen shock, their weapons forgotten, their loyalty forgotten, their entire understanding of the world reorganizing itself in real time. The desperate stranger on the floor, bleeding and broken, was saving their boss's life with her own body as the instrument of salvation. 7. 8. 9. The compressions came faster now, her breathing ragged, her voice barely a whisper against the sound of her own hands pressing life back into a dying man. She counted to 30 and then tilted his head back, her mouth covering his, breathing her own air into his lungs, tasting copper and cologne and the salt of tears that she did not remember crying. She returned to compressions, and the rhythm became everything, the only heartbeat that mattered, the only reason the universe had not yet swallowed them both whole. 30 seconds passed. 60. 90. Lucian gasped. His eyes flew open like a man who had been drowning and had just broken the surface of the water. His body convulsed, his chest heaving, and his hands came up on instinct, grabbing at the air, at Serena, at anything that could anchor him back to the world of the living. His eyes found hers, and what Serena saw in that moment was the face of a man who had just looked into the void and lived to tell about it. She had no idea what she looked like to him, bleeding, fierce, her hand still pressed to his chest, her tears mixing with blood that might have been his or hers or both of them together. She only knew that his lips moved, forming a word that came out as barely a whisper. "Why?" he breathed. "Because I understand what it means to lose one more person," Serena answered, and her voice was trembling like a candle in the wind. Rocco was already on the phone, his words clipped and urgent. His boss was down but responsive. "Send paramedics. Send everyone. Send them now." The sound of sirens carved through the night, splitting the air like a blade wrapped in ice. The paramedics rushed through the doors of Ross's Italian restaurant like a storm breaking over water, their equipment rattling against their chests, their voices sharp and efficient. They lifted Lucian onto a stretcher, his eyes still locked on Serena's face as they wheeled him toward the ambulance waiting outside, its lights painting the frozen streets in shades of red and blue. Rocco moved to follow, but Serena grabbed his arm, her blood-stained hands trembling against his jacket. "He saved me," she whispered. "When he collapsed, he was shielding me from falling. He put himself between me and the floor." Rocco's jaw tightened. In 15 years of working for Lucian Rossi, he had never heard anyone speak about his boss with this kind of fierce tenderness, this recognition of a sacrifice made in a moment of chaos. He squeezed her shoulder once, then followed the paramedics into the night. The emergency room at Penn Medicine hummed with the sound of monitored heartbeats and the soft beeping of machines that measured life in precise, digital increments. Serena sat in a plastic chair outside the cardiac intensive care unit, her coat still torn, her ribs still aching where Harold had thrown her against the counter. A nurse had offered her a hospital gown to change into, but she refused. She needed to feel the weight of her own clothes, the texture of fabric that connected her to the world outside this place of fluorescent lights and dying people. A social worker approached her with forms on a clipboard. Insurance information. Emergency contact. Next of kin. Serena stared at the blank spaces. She had no insurance. She had no emergency contact except Lily, who was 7 years old and sleeping in her school's emergency childcare facility because Serena could not afford a babysitter at 3 in the morning. She had no family except the ones who had burned her, who had stolen from her, who wanted her silenced forever. "I don't have anyone to list," Serena told the social worker, her voice barely a whisper. But as the night deepened into the small hours before dawn, Rocco and Gino began to arrive with other men in expensive dark suits who carried themselves like a quiet threat. They filled the waiting room. They brought coffee they did not drink. They sat in absolute silence, their presence a wall of loyalty that neither the hospital staff nor the social worker could penetrate. Serena understood what this meant. Lucian Rossi had not died. And he had people who would wait for him to wake. At 4:27 in the morning, a doctor emerged with a chart in her hands. Lucian had suffered acute myocardial infarction brought on by severe emotional stress. His heart had simply stopped. But someone had performed CPR with extraordinary precision, keeping his brain oxygenated, keeping his organs alive, buying him time. If she hadn't known what she was doing, the doctor said, looking directly at Serena, he would be dead right now. Whatever you did, you saved his life. Rocco's eyes went very still. He watched Serena's face carefully, waiting to see if she would claim credit, if she would position herself as a savior, as someone owed gratitude. Instead, she just nodded once and said nothing at all. She folded her small hands in her lap. She looked back toward the intensive care unit where Lucian lay unconscious, machines breathing for him, machines measuring the fragile electricity of his heart. Rocco stepped into the hallway and made a phone call. His voice was low and controlled as he spoke to the person on the other end. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention. Harold Brennan and Victoria Ashford." "Yes." "Full investigation." Financial records, witness statements, everything we can find. And there's a child. 7 years old. She needs surgery. $65,000. Arrange it through Penn Medicine. Wire the money tonight. He paused, listening to the response. Then, no questions. Just do it. That's what the boss would want. What Rocco did not know was that the person on the other end of that call was Michael Chen, Lucian's attorney, who had been wearing a wire for the Federal Bureau of Investigation for the past 8 months. Michael Chen had been cooperating with Special Agent Sarah Collins since the day he discovered that one of Lucian's business partners was moving heroin through the ports of Philadelphia using Lucian's shipping company as a cover. Michael Chen had spent 8 months recording conversations, documenting transfers, building a case. And now, on this particular morning at 4:44 a.m., Rocco's phone call had just handed the FBI everything they needed to prove that Lucian Rossi himself had authorized the investigation. That Lucian Rossi had knowledge of the crimes. That Lucian Rossi had taken direct action to cover them up. The investigation that would save Serena Morgan's life would become the same investigation that destroyed his. 5 days later, at exactly 7:15 in the morning, Serena stood in the preoperative holding area at Penn Medicine Children's Hospital, watching as Lily was wheeled toward the operating room. Her daughter was 7 years old and small for her age, her heart having stolen resources from her body that should have gone to growth, to strength, to the simple business of being a child. Lily's left hand gripped a stuffed rabbit that had belonged to Serena's mother. Her right hand reached out for Serena as the orderlies guided the stretcher forward. "Mama, it doesn't hurt anymore," Lily said, her voice steady in the way only children could be steady, with absolute faith in adults who had promised her safety. "The doctor said after today my heart will work like other kids' hearts." Serena walked beside the stretcher until they reached the doors where parents could not follow. She kissed her daughter's forehead, her lips trembling against Lily's warm skin. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more than anything in this world." "I know, Mama," Lily said. "I'm not scared because you saved someone's life. That means you know how to fix broken things." The doors closed. Serena turned and walked back to the surgical waiting room, where Lucian was sitting in a chair by the window, his left arm still moving carefully, his chest still wrapped beneath his shirt from the cardiac catheterization they had performed after his collapse. He had been released from intensive care 3 days ago. Against all medical advice, he had been present at every moment since, sitting beside Serena, bringing her coffee she did not drink, asking if she needed anything, needing nothing in return. Rocco and Gino stood near the entrance, their eyes scanning the waiting room with the habitual wariness of men whose boss was a target. When they saw Lucian watching Serena with an expression that could only be described as tender, both men exchanged a look. In 15 years of working for Lucian Rossi, they had never seen this. They had seen him command armies. They had seen him negotiate with federal judges. They had seen him order men's deaths with less emotion than most people ordered coffee. But they had never seen him sit quietly beside a woman who was terrified, asking nothing of her except that she not face the terror alone. Serena took the seat beside Lucian. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes forward, toward the double doors where her daughter had disappeared. Lucian reached over and took her hand. His hand was warm, his grip gentle but certain, the grip of a man used to holding power but choosing in this moment to offer only presence. "She's going to be fine," Lucian said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "You don't know that," Serena whispered. "I do," he replied. "Because she has her mother. And her mother is the strongest person I have ever met. She brought a man back from the dead in the middle of a blizzard with her bare hands. A 7-year-old girl's heart does not stand a chance against her." 6 hours passed. Then 7. The morning light moved across the waiting room floor in a slow diagonal that marked the passing of time with brutal precision. At hour 8, Dr. Martinez emerged through the double doors, still in her surgical mask, still in her blue operating room scrubs. Serena stood so quickly her chair clattered backward. Lucian rose beside her, his hand never leaving hers. "The surgery was successful," Dr. Martinez said, and her smile was genuine, the smile of someone who had just handed a family their daughter back. Lily's heart is repaired. Her oxygen saturation is excellent. She's in recovery now, and she's asking for her mama. Serena made a sound that was not quite a word. It was something between a prayer and a scream, something between relief and gratitude and the breaking open of a terror she had been carrying since the day she first heard the diagnosis. She collapsed into Lucian's chest, and he wrapped his arms around her with extraordinary gentleness, his chin resting against the top of her head, his breathing deliberate and slow, breathing for both of them until she could remember how to breathe on her own. Rocco and Gino watched from the doorway. Gino's eyes had gone very bright. Rocco's jaw was locked, but there was something different in his face, something that looked almost like understanding, like the recognition of a man who had just witnessed the most powerful person he knew choose to be vulnerable with someone he loved. 2 weeks later, on a night when the temperature had dropped below freezing and the wind came down from Canada carrying the promise of snow, Serena received a call from a lawyer named David Rothstein. Harold Brennan had been arrested. Victoria Ashford had been arrested. Both of them were facing federal charges. Embezzlement. Money laundering. Conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was not even going to trial. Harold had already agreed to accept a plea deal, 40 years in federal prison. Victoria, too. 40 years. They would both be older than 80 when they were released, if they lived that long. The stolen money was being returned. A trust fund was being established for Lily. Everything was being made right. Everything except the cost. That same morning, FBI Special Agent Sarah Collins sat across from Lucian Rossi in his office on the top floor of a skyscraper that overlooked all of Philadelphia. The office was exactly what you would expect, expensive beyond measure, filled with art that cost more than most people's houses, with windows that commanded a view of the entire city. But Lucian's face, as Sarah opened a manila folder and set it on the desk between them, showed no surprise. "We found what we were looking for," Sarah said quietly. "Harold Brennan and Victoria Ashford. 40 years each. The stolen inheritance will be returned. Justice has been served." Lucian nodded. He said nothing. "But we also found something else," Sarah continued, and she opened the folder to reveal financial records, wire transfers, shipping manifests, recorded phone calls. "During the past 15 years, you have engaged in systematic racketeering, money laundering, extortion, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. 23 federal counts. The minimum sentence is 30 years in federal prison." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming through the ventilation system, the distant sound of the city 60 stories below, the sound of Lucian's own measured breathing. "When will you come for me?" he asked, his voice still deep and solid like an oath, but now it sounded like the oath of a man who had already surrendered. "That depends," Sarah said. "That depends on whether you cooperate fully with our investigation. If you provide testimony against every person you have ever worked with, every money laundering operation you have ever run, every crime you have ever committed or ordered, the federal prosecutor has authorized me to offer you a deal, 15 years instead of 30. Sarah set another folder on the desk. Witness protection. New identity. A life lived in exile, separated from everyone he had ever known, separated from the woman who had saved his life. "You have 72 hours to decide," Sarah said as she stood to leave. "You can turn yourself in and cooperate, serve 15 years, and potentially walk free at age 70. Or you can refuse, fight the charges, lose, and spend the rest of your natural life in prison. Either way, you will never see Philadelphia again. Either way, you will never see her again." She left, and Lucian sat alone in his office with the city stretched out beneath him, a city he had ruled, a city he would have to leave behind forever. Word count, 1,847. The penthouse overlooked Philadelphia from the 63rd floor, all glass and steel and the weight of 20 years of terrible choices made beautiful by elevation and expensive bourbon. Lucian Rossi stood at the window 3 days after the FBI raid, his reflection ghostly in the darkness, and behind him the city glittered like he had never owned it at all. Serena arrived at 8 in the evening. Maria had taken Lily to her apartment, the girl's small body still recovering, her heart, that surgically repaired heart, beating steady and strong for the first time in her short life. Lucian turned from the window when Serena stepped into the room, and the distance between them felt like a blade wrapped in ice. "Sit," he said. His voice sounded hollow, a man speaking from very far away. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing the same blue dress she had worn the night she collapsed in his restaurant, the night that had split her life into before and after. He poured bourbon into a crystal glass he would not drink from. The amber liquid caught the light like liquid gold. "Agent Collins was here this morning," he began. "The investigation into Harold and Victoria is complete. The evidence you provided, everything you witnessed, everything you heard, it was sufficient. Harold faces 42 years on charges of assault, attempted murder, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Victoria faces 38 years on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. They will not see freedom again in this lifetime." Serena's chest tightened. She had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that testimony had not. "Lily's surgery was paid for through illegal money," he continued. His eyes met hers for the first time. "My money. My crimes. The hospital has been informed. They are deciding whether to pursue charges against me as well, or whether they will accept the civil settlement I have arranged to cover all treatment costs retroactively. That part may not go to prison. That part may save me. Lucian. There is more." He set the glass down without drinking. His hands were steady, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "The investigation into my operations has revealed 38 counts of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. Federal crimes with a minimum sentence of 30 years. Maximum sentence is 40. The FBI has offered me a choice." The room seemed to tilt. She gripped the edge of the sofa. "Cooperate fully," he said. "Testify against every person I have ever worked with. Provide evidence of every operation, every transaction, every crime I have ordered or committed. In exchange, the federal prosecutor will reduce the sentence to 15 years. Still a life sentence, Serena, but not death in prison. I could potentially walk free at 70. Potentially. Or," she whispered. "Or I refuse to cooperate. I fight the charges. I lose because the evidence is overwhelming. And I spend 40 years in federal prison. Possibly more." He turned back to the window. "Either way, there is no path forward where I remain free. Either way, I disappear." Serena's hands began to shake. "What do they want from me?" "They want you to testify. Agent Collins came here with a folder full of conversations you overheard, transactions you witnessed, meetings you were present for. They have enough to convict me without you. But your testimony would strengthen the case against my lieutenants, against the people in my organization. And they are offering you protection." He turned to face her fully now, and she saw something break in his expression, something ancient and careful finally fracturing. "Witness protection. New identity. New social security number. $200,000 settlement. You and Lily disappear. You go to Portland or Denver or somewhere I will never find you, and you live a life where no one knows what you have survived, what you have sacrificed. You build something safe. You build something clean. At what cost?" Her voice was barely audible. "At the cost of my freedom," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath made in a graveyard. "I am not a good man, Serena. I have done terrible things. I have ordered people to hurt other people. I have built an empire on blood and fear and the willingness to destroy anyone who threatened my power. The justice you deserve is the thing that will destroy us both." She stood up. She had to move, had to do something with the agony spreading through her chest. "You saved Lily's life. You gave me everything when I had nothing. How can they ask me to destroy you?" "Because it is the right thing," he said quietly. Because you are brave enough to do it and I am not brave enough to ask you not to. The silence stretched between them like something living, something with teeth. Outside, Philadelphia hummed with 8 million people making 8 million different choices, and inside this glass box above the city, 2 people stood at the edge of the only choice that mattered. When do they want my answer? She asked. Tomorrow morning. They are waiting for you in a federal building downtown. Agent Collins will brief you on what testimony they need. They will explain the protection program. They will show you photographs of safe houses in 3 different states. And you will sign papers that will erase Serena Morgan from every database in the world. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw the man who had sat beside a stranger bleeding on his restaurant floor and chosen compassion over power. She saw the man who had held a 7-year-old girl's hand before surgery and promised her everything would be okay. She saw the man who was now letting her go because he loved her more than he loved freedom. I will do it, she said. The words came out steady, shaped by something stronger than fear. I will testify. I will sign whatever they ask me to sign. Because Lily deserves a life where she is not running, where she is not afraid. She deserves safety that does not come with a price. Lucian closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was something like peace in them, and something like devastation. Then that is the last gift I can give you, he said. The freedom to leave me behind and build something that is entirely yours. That night, Serena did not sleep. She sat in her small apartment across the city from the penthouse and looked at photographs of Lily asleep, her daughter's chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a repaired heart. She thought about Harold sitting in a federal holding cell. She thought about Victoria Ashford's name being dragged through every news outlet in Pennsylvania, her social standing obliterated, her reputation cremated in the furnace of her own cruelty. And she thought about Lucian, alone in his glass tower, preparing to sacrifice everything so that she could be free. At 9 the next morning, Serena walked into the federal building downtown. Agent Collins was waiting for her in a small conference room on the 4th floor. The prosecutor sat across the table, flanked by 2 paralegals carrying thick folders. Ms. Morgan, the prosecutor began. We have prepared a comprehensive witness agreement. If you testify truthfully regarding Lucian Ross's criminal enterprises, the federal government will provide you and your daughter with complete protection under the Witness Security Program. New identities, relocation assistance, ongoing security. A $200,000 settlement for your cooperation. Full immunity from any charges related to your time in proximity to criminal activity. They opened the folders. Financial records. Recorded conversations. A map of Lucian's entire empire, color-coded and cross-referenced. What happens to him? Serena asked. Her voice did not shake. Agent Collins and the prosecutor exchanged a glance. Collins answered, with full cooperation, 15 years minimum. Without cooperation, 35 to 40 years. Either way, Ms. Morgan, this man will die in prison. Serena looked down at the folder with Lucian's name on the tab. She thought of his hand steady as he poured bourbon he would not drink. She thought of his voice saying I am not a good man and meaning it completely, meaning it as a confession and a farewell. She picked up the pen. I will testify, she said. I will tell them everything. The signing took 12 minutes. When it was finished, she was no longer Serena Morgan. On paper, in the eyes of the federal government, she had become someone else entirely. That night, Lucian sent word through Rocco that she should come to the penthouse one final time. She climbed the elevator as the sun set over Philadelphia, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood red. Lucian was waiting in the living room. They stood 6 feet apart, a distance that felt like a continent, like the boundary between 2 different lives. You did it, he said. Not a question. Yes. Then you made the right choice. His voice was steady, but she could see the tremor in his hands. Then why does it feel like dying? Tears ran down her face. She did not try to stop them. Because you are the first person in 20 years to choose truth over survival, he said. And that choice will cost you everything, and it will cost me everything, and neither of us will ever be able to explain why it was worth it to anyone who has never loved someone the way we love each other. But it is worth it, Serena. You have to believe that it is worth it. She left without letting him touch her, without letting him say goodbye, because some goodbyes are so final that they shatter everything they touch. What she did not know was that Lucian had already made his own choice, one that would cost him everything but give her the only thing that mattered, freedom. Word count, 1487. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel, like and share this video with the people you love. Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace.